Well, who is us, first of all? America is a very, and the government is in transition. It very much depends on who is the next president, of course. I think we're coming to end of 8 years of Obama's foreign policy. He did really well, in my opinion, in achieving the nuclear deal. If we were right now having another dimension of confrontation over the nuclear deal and it was getting to a military scale, given everything else that's happening in the region, that would have been devastating for everyone. It really depends on the next president and what policies he or she would put forward. It would depend a lot on the regional issue. We try to focus mostly on domestic issues, but it is a very naked truth that you look at that region, the only country which is not up in flames and in civil war or some kind of armed conflict is Iran. You have Jordan kind of quiet there. Turkey, of course, is involved. The entire region is burning, and I'm not optimistic on that front in general for the region. It is a situation that began in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq. No one seems to really have any good policies. The sectarian aspect of it keeps getting worse and worse every day. But for Iranians, precisely, it's not a matter of trusting the US or they pursue regime change or not. First of all, I don't think US really has that many options for regime change in Iran that'd be meaningful. The Iranian people themselves like to think that if they want regime change, they want to do it themselves. That's been, as OMID said, the Iranians, in the interest of the stability of their own country, are going to, one way or another, try not to inflame the conflicts in Syria too much. Right now, they're playing a major role, of course. They're actually fighting along with the Syrian regime. But I think at the end, if cooler heads prevail, and definitely enough people in Iran have a cool head, that a political solution to Syria is the only solution over a military solution. The question really is, when Republican candidates here say the only solution is to go bomb the hell out of them, or there are commentators in Israel writing op-eds that, look, during World War II we had to have Dresden and, leveling of Dresden, or Hiroshima, you just get to a point in a conflict where you have to take a lot of civilian lives to put an end to the conflict. Those are really worrisome, that any major escalation, especially with ground troops in Syria, that would definitely destabilize the entire region and eventually spill into Iran, and Iran would have to get involved to protect its own borders from ISIS. But let's hope, I think that's the work we all as American citizens here have cut out for us, is how this election going to proceed, who's going to be the next president, and what kind of policies toward Middle East they will have. That's where we have a responsibility to engage as much as we can.
I think when you go to the Middle East, there is no trust whatsoever when it comes to the U.S. and U.S. policies in the region. That's, I think, all players in the entire region are very suspicious about the U.S. as the media people and governments, because of the many people, like for example, many inside Iran, whether they are pro-government or they are anti-government, whether they are opposition or hardliners, they criticize the U.S. foreign policy over the past 10 years, and they see, for example, the creation of ISIS as one of the side effects of attacking Iraq, and so there is no trust. And also the U.S. Unconditional support for Saudis who have been funding madrasas, school, really Salafi schools in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Europe, in the U.S. They're funding mosques in the U.S. and they are spreading this crazy ideology. And then they have been silent about it. They have always sided with Saudis. So no, there is nothing about the U.S. Foreign policy to be trusted at all. But it's a matter of interest too. They have mutual interest. Iran has been always a part of the problem in the eyes of Americans. But at the same time, Iran is a part of solution too. So I think that the optimistic part is the fact that they have decided to include Iran in the solution. They have started to talk to each other with Russians, Iranians, and they have started to think that there should be a diplomatic solution. And I think that's a good part. For years, they excluded Iran as one of the major players in the region, as one of the sides that has so many to lose in Syria. They excluded Iran. I think that was not a wise decision. They have finally understood that it was a failed approach, and they have to include Iran. From this point of view, I think this is very optimistic that finally they have come to this point.
Sure. I just wanted to add that after the early years of the Islamic Revolution, Iranian regime by and large has proved to act as a rational actor in international politics. And it's not unprecedented that Iran and US would cooperate on issues of mutual interest. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that Iranian government provide a very vital information to the coalition of forces in Afghanistan that actually toppled the Taliban regime. Because a few years before, Iranian consulate in Mazar Sharif was attacked by Taliban, and Iranian diplomats were brutally murdered. But at the time, many thought that this might be beginning of a conflict between Iran and Afghanistan, but a calculated move by Iran resulted in waiting and joining indirectly coalition of forces in Afghanistan. So it's not unforeseeable that Iran would cooperate again with the West if they see their mutual interests. As OMID pointed out, what's actually hopeful and what we are optimistic about is the fact that forces here in the West are starting to recognize that Iran should be part of the solution. I think there is one credible narrative that says Iran was even ready to cooperate with the US in Iraq, and then the Axis of Evil story distorted everything. Regardless of that, the experience of Iraq and all the conflict in Afghanistan, in the absence of meaningful cooperation with regional forces, shows the outcome. Without the presence of meaningful and effective presence of regional forces, there's no way to address problems in the Middle East. And I think what's good about the situation is that there are people here who are starting to recognize that Iran has to be part of the solution. And also in terms of your question about the regime change, I think, at least Obama's administration has tried really hard to spell out US intentions in terms of nuclear issue and ensuring the Iranians that it's not the intention of the United States to pursue regime change in Iran anymore, let's say, for a lack of better term, or maybe they have or have not been. And I think in the absence of that threat, if the Iranian system doesn't feel threatened, then they might be willing to take more steps in addressing, in engaging in international issues again, because the Iranian leader was actually very influenced by what happened in Libya, sort of in his mindset that if you give up your military forces and not to do anything, there might be an uprising and things like that. But I think Obama's administration and also the technocrat government in Iran have been trying to create this new discourse that is not about existential threat of the West. That being said, there are hardliners who still think that. There are still people who think the project I was talking about. There are people who think that the West is going to try to influence Iran through McDonald's and startups and technology and things like that. But I think there is a different discourse inside the country in Iran, and there's a different discourse here. So it's up to this to the people to push for the one that could be mutually reconciled. I think it's a very complicated question because there is no independent survey or free press in Iran that you can actually assess the weight the forces carry. What I tend to look is often the elections that the hardliners have lost, because that shows the solid block of their support. So it's not that they are not supported domestically at all, but I think whenever the general public, and I have to say that probably the urban middle class decided to participate in the process of elections in Iran that are far from free and fair, you see the result in favor of more moderation and more reform. And what I would like to look at the leaders of Iran as a system of dictatorship. It's not a one-person dictatorship, that there's one person on the top that makes all the decisions and all the people below him will implement it. It's a system. It has its own checks and balances within the system. There are more moderate forces and more extremist ones, and the extremist one, the hardliners, have learned it the hard way during the reform era. So they've invested on building institutions that are, by and large, not overseen by the constitutional mechanisms. And they are heavily involved in Iranian economy, for example. And those are actually, it's worth mentioning that those were the ones who benefited the most under sanctions. Those quasi-legal mechanisms that, for example, people closer to the establishment used to transfer money. And what hurt the Iranian citizen was the wire system, for example, or the SWIFT system. They couldn't use international banks, or private investors couldn't use that system to transfer money. But those groups were connected, and they were connected to all sort of shady businesses that they could do this. So it's a system that is mainly ideological, but it is also reinforced its reach and power through other means, through institution building. And then I think I will let others to complete. Maybe it was too abstract.
Do you think she answered the question?
Do you think that? I think the key point is that really it's not a one-man dictatorship. It has been a very smart, diffused kind of control, and there are many interests. There are even local, what I would call fiefdoms in certain cities, where the combination of political power and money has created untouchable systems that run their own local affairs. One thing in your question was, have the people become apolitical? Have they given up? Not at all. They're just very patient. I see a fairly mature population that, for example, a lot of time they don't want to pay a heavy price by being uprooted. If they realize dissidents or people who want to challenge the system know their own power and when is the right time to come out and when not to. I think a lot of potential is being built, and really the most fascinating, another aspect of it to me, is culturally. The society has developed its own cultural norms that have nothing to do with the official culture being propagated, or in the schools and in the media, which is all state-controlled, being called the Iranian Islamic culture. You go and actually people have completely developed their own way of life that's in parallel to the official narrative. And it is a very patient and gradual stepping forward that as the space will open for it will flourish.
And you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic as long as regional forces don't encroach and destabilize Iran. I would really worry. There are people in this country who propose, for example, that it's to the U.S. interest to destabilize Iran, to arm minorities along the borders, try to, all this armed conflict should somehow reach Iran too, because the Iranian central government is a part of the problem in the region and therefore it should be weakened. ISIS, if by any means will, engage Iran militarily, it could be very devastating, and a major conflict between Iran and Syria and Saudi Arabia head on could be in the cards. We don't know that. I don't think Iranian government's interested at all. The Saudis are more cool-headed than that, but there are indications of it. We never thought, after U.S. pulled out of Iraq, that within 3 years of it we would be where we are in Syria, ISIS, so on. That really, no one could predict that. So I do worry about an Iran-Saudi direct confrontation or even Iran-Turkey confrontation that neither wants it but could happen somehow. But within the country, I'm optimistic if external forces do not push it and tear it apart, that the direction the general culture and society going is very patiently toward a better future.
One observation I just wanted to add, something, living and growing up in Iran, I have observed is that when you travel to the Middle East, in many countries there is a fantasy of bringing Islamists to power, and they, from Egypt, to Iraq, Pakistan, and there's a fantasy between people that they like that, see the Islamists come to power. I think Iran is very much different than that, and I think we have had it enough. And people, I think that's one of the only countries in the entire region that we have done it 37 years ago, and it didn't work out. 37 years ago, they mixed religion and politics, and it became a really corrupt system. So you see, now even Rouhani, the president, he's a cleric, but he wants to be introduced as Dr. Hassan Rouhani. He has a PhD in something. Or other clerics.
The jurist. It says
Yeah, I'm a jurist, yeah. And then many other clerics, they want to say doctor. They want to have a doctorate in something, in the Bayed, or you just go to Phoenix University online. But they want to have a PhD. That doesn't really work because people do not trust them. The number of clerics in the parliament has decreased dramatically over the past 20 years. The number is just coming down. So people, and the number of clerics that commit crimes has grown, and then so they, for the sake of the respect in the society, they have created a separate court for them, a special court for clerics, because they don't want clerics to go from the same a hall in the same court, and people see this guy imagine. Anyways, but we have had this experience, and I think this is a really important thing to consider, that the Iranian society has had this, is in a different move. I believe we are 3 decades ahead of any countries in the Middle East who has this fantasy of bringing Islamists, and that makes it worth attentioning more and supporting the civil society. That's why human rights is a big deal in Iran, because there is a huge and vibrant civil society inside the country and out of the country, and they push for change. These are the things that makes Iran very different than other countries in the region, which I think that comes from the revolution that we had. When over the past years, the role of the Revolutionary Guards became bigger and bigger in Iran's economy. So when the U.S. put sanctions on Iran, one of the players that hurt the most was the Revolutionary Guards. So they were very much in favor of the deal, because their companies really they were in a bad situation. So in terms when it comes to the deal, you see throughout the entire negotiation, the Revolutionary Guards was behind the president. They might have criticized some aspects of the deal or the negotiations, but in general, they were always supporting the deal. But when it comes to domestic issues, they have basically inside the country, they have taken the president, the pragmatic, he calls himself moderate, the moderate president hostage. Over the past 2 years, in Iran, we have the Ministry of Intelligence and the intelligence organization of the Revolutionary Guards. And a vast majority of human rights violations happen under the Revolutionary Guards intelligence. They go after people and arrest them, and then they are very much in line with the judiciary and, give them harsh sentences and all that. And President Rouhani has been very much silent over the past 2 years and has not challenged them, has not confronted them. And I think that the current situation has made the president a very weak president in the eyes of many people. Because at this, as you said, he has to be in line with them because of the nuclear deal and the implementation, because they can really mess up with the whole implementation. And on the other side, when it comes to domestic issues, he doesn't have that much power, and if he confronts them, there might be problems. So I think overall, they have created a really dangerous parallel system that has basically leaves no power for the president.
Yeah, it's actually not a speculation. Numerous Iranian officials within Iran and when visiting the US have put that as a demand. Rouhani himself said it in September in New York in interviews on US television. Then the head of the parliament, who happened to come to New York too, has brought it up. Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, has brought it up. So yeah, there is definitely credibility in that. And it is a very dangerous precedent if the US goes ahead, which has been resisting for now and not doing it. But definitely it's one of the face-saving ways for these intelligence services who have detained dual nationals to get something in return. It is becoming very much of a trade-in issue. Like now they have these individuals, they really don't know what to do with them. They like to get something back for it, and one of the options would be a swap, prisoner swap, which apparently happened very quietly already with regard to the 3 American hikers. If you recall, in 2009, they were in Iran in jail for a couple of years, and I've heard that actually they were swapped, and a couple of Iranians were released months after they returned to US very quietly. But there was a quiet understanding between the two sides that is a swap. So, yeah, Iranians would definitely like to have that happen.
Why is it dangerous, President?
Because then you're encouraging hostage taking of innocent individuals, especially dual nationals. When they go back to Iran, everyone would be basically a very attractive bait for intelligence services.
Can you give us some examples of how sanctions harm regular people in Iran? We always hear the word sanctions, and we know it's not a good thing and it's not helpful, but can you give some concrete examples of what it prevents?
Sure. Actually, HADI and OMID's organization worked a lot on this issue, and they've consistently raised their voice in support of people inside the country. So I keep my comments very brief and let them explain more. But one of the ways that sanction created problems for ordinary Iranians was the fact that although there was humanitarian exemptions in place, for medication and other vital needs of Iranians, they weren't working properly. And by working properly, I don't mean that there were necessarily issues with the text of the licenses that were being issued, but the fact that businesses do not want to operate in a very risky environment. So even though there were humanitarian exemptions in place, many were not interested in doing business. So if, or for example, engaging in a risky behavior of exporting goods and services to Iran and having to deal with this massive bureaucracy created here. And you hear here and there about the amounts of fines companies had to pay in the case that they were suspected of engaging in violation of sanctions. And one other way that I can use my personal example was the Iranian students who were abroad and they were getting support from their families inside the country. After those legal venues were closed down, it was basically impossible for them to receive money. And I used to bring cash, literally cash in my hand whenever I visited my parents abroad, because there was really no way for them to get money. And every time they did, and still do, and this situation hasn't changed.
It's being recorded, you shouldn't say that.
Hasn't changed. No, it's not illegal.
I'm kidding.
It wasn't illegal, but it was just no legal way for them to receive this help.
About cash.
As long as it's below 10,000, you don't have to report it at the borders. So
below 10,000.
So it was, and every time they ran the risk of getting picked up by banks or other institutions, and we had multiple instances of people not being able to open bank accounts or their bank accounts being closed down because the bank decided to just take a more stricted approach than what the regulations required them and not run the risk of having Iranian citizens have bank accounts there. So these are my examples, but I think HADI and OMID can explain better about the situation.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just the overall economy crashed because anyway, post-revolutionary governments in Iran have really never had any consistent economic policy. There are a lot of economic ills in the country, corruption, graft, all kind of problems that had resulted in huge unemployment when you have a very young population. And then suddenly, you know, that unemployment went through the roof, inflation went through the roof. So people's access to basic necessities became much more expensive. Their ability to work and earn an income became much more restricted. The money they had became much more worthless because the currency just lost 2/3 of its value within a week. That has not recovered. So in general, people were being hurt, and the specific examples of it definitely in medicine, medical care, the access to, you know, certain professional needs, the fact that you're just, you know, it got to a point where even email, Yahoo was is the most popular email service in Iran, and because of the sanctions, they didn't let Iranians sign up for new accounts anymore. They took Iran off of that drop-down menu. And, you know, so people were suffering left and right depending on their kind of work. But the one I heard most consistently is the fact that it's much harder to earn money, and the money you earn has lost its value, and inflation, and the fact that there were just private sector was factories were shutting down. Employers didn't have money to pay their workers. So, you know, parts could not be important for manufacturing. So the entire manufacturing sector was shutting down and laying people off.
One last question, maybe? Yes.
So your question is, did the sanctions contribute to the nuclear agreement or Iran coming to the table? It is definitely a very contested issue among analysts, and a lot of people, including the Iranian side, would like to say that we were not, that was not an issue, we weren't heard enough. I think they could have survived They didn't have to come to the table just for the sanctions, but because of the impact, I said, on the society, they knew they're playing with fire. That domestically, continuation of the situation would give more fuel to uprisings and discontent among their population. And from what Rouhani himself has said multiple times since he took power, the treasury was empty when he came to power. I think they were facing a situation where within a couple years, they literally could not pay civil employees and fund, their basic expenditures. I think that was very important in persuading the supreme leader to come to the table. As much as there are people who say the sanctions didn't play a role, I think they did play a role, but Iran could have survived, but it just would have been more in a more precious situation, both domestically and regionally. We have an entire report on it, about 80 pages. Yeah, our report on sanction precisely had to take into account that you're talking about a fairly dysfunctional and mismanaged economic system. You can't just isolate the sanctions and look at it. And amazingly, there was a feedback loop. The more sanctions, the more economic mismanagement led to crazy situations that only now we're finding out under Rouhani. So the biggest fraud, which was $100 billion, I mean, it was in billions, the banking fraud.
I don't think we know the amounts.
Yeah, but the issues of theft and graft and corruption that are coming out directly connected to sanctions, and because of sanctions has been staggering.
I would say something about the connection between sanctions and the nuclear deal. I think what the Iranian president has said, I think it stands by itself. He a few times he said, it was because of sanctions, have been devastating. Our treasury is empty and all that. And I think, look, what was the big picture? I talked to a number of people in Congress. We worked on did a lot of work to remove some items in the sanctions, the kind of sanctions that hurt ordinary Iranians. I heard from many people that the idea was not to just sanction Iran for 2 or 3 years, 5 years, and then leave it there. The idea was to make Iran an example for any other country in the world who is going after making a nuclear bomb or having a nuclear program that is not supervised the way that they want it, to make an example of Iran. And I remember I heard from an expert in Congress, one of the staffers, that if 10 years from now, you and I are sitting here and we are talking about whether Iran is going after a nuclear bomb or not, then it means sanctions have worked. Because the idea was that, to keep the non-proliferation regime and, make sure that no countries in the world would dare to go after such a program. And they made it happen, because they made it so risky and so costly for any rational government in the world, any rational country in the world, that nobody would have touched it. And I think that in that sense was successful. And Iranians, I think these the new government, the pragmatic government in Tehran, they could see that. They understand numbers, they understand economy, as you know better than me. So they knew it's not it's a lost game, So the sooner the better to just make the deal. And I think that was that contributed, in my opinion, I think that contributed very much to going after nuclear deal and a lot of compromises that they made.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for
Of
coming.
course.
And this one is by Hebrews Canto.
all so much.